last lecture of the series from chapter 11, I just wanted to review for section 4. These are inheritance patterns that go beyond Mendelian inheritance, which remember is Mendelian inheritance. Another way to say that is simple dominance. That means that there are two versions, two alleles for every trait, and one allele is dominant, the other is recessive. That is how the traits in the garden pea plants are inherited. It's also how some of the human traits are inherited, like some of these disorders that we just went over. Cystic fibrosis is an example of one. But then we have human conditions and human traits that are inherited differently. And one of those inheritance patterns is called multiple alleles. We see that with the ABO blood types. There are 3 alleles for blood type instead of 2. So there are 3 versions of that trait. The IA, IB, and little I allele. Another inheritance pattern that we see is called codominance. We see this also with ABO blood type, and we see this with blood type AB. So blood type AB expresses codominance because the individual has the genotype IA, IB, and both of those alleles are expressed. The red blood cell has A antigens and B antigens on its surface. So we have in blood types, we have multiple alleles and we have codominance. And there are some other traits that are inherited by incomplete dominance. Our first example was a flower, a snapdragon flower, where if you crossed a red flower with a white flower, then you would get heterozygous offspring that are all pink. But another example of incomplete dominance, and this is in humans, is familial hypercholesterolemia. The heterozygous individual will not have high cholesterol and symptoms that are as bad as the homozygous individual. But the heterozygous individual will be a blend of the person who's homozygous for FH and the person who's homozygous for normal cholesterol. Then incomplete penetrance, we saw that with polydactyly or extra digits. That technically you would see many people with extra digits because it's a dominant disorder, but we don't see it expressed as much, so we call that incomplete penetrance. Pleiotropy, we saw that with Marfan syndrome, is when one allele or one gene affects many different traits. And polygenic inheritance is the one that we were on when the recorder cut off. In polygenic inheritance, we see a continuous variation of phenotypes. We don't see 2 versions of a trait or 3 versions of a trait. We see many versions of a trait. For human skin color, we don't see just light and dark. We see, just go look at the variety of women's foundations that they put, face makeup. If you look at the varieties of colors and shades that there are, that will let you know. And there's so many more varieties than what they even sell in the store. A lot of women I know have to mix shades together to get the perfect color, So anyway, skin color, height, you don't just see tall and short. You don't even see tall, medium height, and short. You see a continuous range from the shortest individuals to the tallest individuals. And eye color, so many different versions of blue, so many different versions of brown. And then, of course, there's green, and there's even people who have purple eyes, naturally, without the colored lenses. And this shows you how this is a simplistic explanation of how skin color can be inherited. So let's say that there are 3 different genes for skin color. There's actually, I think, 10 at least. But let's say there are 3, and they're represented by the letters A, B, and C. So the more big letters you have, the darker your skin color is going to be. So if you've got all 6 little letters, then you have the lightest shade of skin. If you've got all 6 big letters, you have the darkest shade of skin. And then most people are somewhere in the middle. They have 3 big, most people on the earth are somewhere in the middle. They have 3 big letters, and that will give them the medium shade. And this works the same way with height. Now we are going to talk about the sex chromosomes. The sex chromosomes are pair 23, and the sex chromosomes determine gender. So if pair 23 contains 2 X chromosomes, that person chromosomally is a female. If pair 23 contains an X and a Y, that person is chromosomally is a male. So there are some traits that are inherited by X-linked inheritance. And that means the gene is carried on the X chromosome. So males who only have 1 X chromosome will only have 1 copy of the gene. Thomas Hunt Morgan in the early 1900s did experiments with fruit flies and found that fruit flies had sex-linked traits. And there were a lot, in fact, we do a lot of genetics experiments today in biology classes and genetics classes in college using fruit flies, because fruit flies have a lot of sex-linked traits. Their eye color, their wings, just different traits that they have are linked on the X sex chromosome. For whatever reason, this was not supposed to be here, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. That was in the wrong order, but this is showing you the P or parent generation of fruit flies, and it's showing you their traits and their genotypes. So the male has X little r y, so it has the little r allele on the X chromosome, and then this female has a big R allele on the X chromosome, and it has 2 X big R alleles. Now, 2 big R's gives you red eyes, little r gives you white eyes. So what happens is they end up with, in the F1 generation, the males are X big RY, and the females are X big R, X little r. So they're carriers of the white eye allele. So the males can either have white eyes or red eyes, but they're only going to get 1 copy of the eye color allele. Okay, so what we end up with is females that have red eyes, but half of those females can be X big R, and half can be X big R, X little r. The ones that have the X little r allele are called carriers. They're carriers of the white eye allele. And then we have the males who can either be red eye or they can be white eye. But when they inherit the white eye allele, they inherit it from the mother. And that's key with sex-linked or X-linked inheritance, is that the males inherit the disorder or the trait from the mother, okay? Because the father did not have an X little r to give. The males always get their X chromosome from the mother. So anyway, the males that get an X-linked disorder get it from their mother. That's important. All right, so human X-linked disorders. We have color blindness, red-green color blindness, which is all of these X-linked disorders can be inherited by females, but the females that inherit these disorders have to be homozygous recessive. They have to have 2 copies of the allele, and it's not common in females. But males, these X-linked disorders are much more common. Everyone I've ever met who's colorblind or who has muscular dystrophy or who has hemophilia, and in my life I've met a lot of people, especially from teaching biology, because people share things with me that maybe they wouldn't always share with everyone. But the only ones I've ever met with X-linked disorders have been males. And that doesn't mean females can't have those disorders, but it's not common. So color blindness is X-linked. Menkes syndrome is X-linked. Muscular dystrophy, adrenoleukodystrophy, and hemophilia. These are all X-linked, human X-linked disorders. And now we have a pedigree where everyone who's shaded in has the disorder. This is a pedigree for an X-linked recessive disorder, and this is for color blindness. The grandfather in this case is colorblind, and the grandmother and the grandfather have these children, a daughter and a son, who are not colorblind, but then the son has children with a woman who is colorblind. And notice that for her to be colorblind, she has to carry X little b, X little b. She has to have 2 copies of the colorblind allele. So, of course, any son that she has is going to be colorblind. If she's colorblind, all her sons are going to be colorblind, because where does the son get the X chromosome? From the mom. So this couple has a colorblind son, and then we have the daughter of the original parents. The grandfather and the grandmother have a daughter. She's a carrier for the colorblind allele, and we know that because one of her sons, she does have a son who isn't colorblind because she's a carrier. She gave him the normal allele, the big B allele, but she also had a son who is colorblind. So anytime a male has an X-linked trait, it came from his mother. And if another thing is, if a daughter has an X-linked trait, then her father had the trait. So there's no way for this daughter here to be colorblind if her father wasn't. Her father has to be colorblind if she's colorblind, because she got her other X chromosome from him. So those are just some patterns to look at in X-linked disorders.